in 4-6, we're actually not learning anything new. We're just learning one additional step to the end of a proof. Okay, so we're going to talk about that one additional step. It's actually abbreviated as CPCTC, which stands for corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent, which really just says if you have two congruent triangles, all their pieces are going to be congruent to each other, even the ones you haven't talked about. Okay, so we have our shortcuts. For instance, if you used side angle side, all of the other pieces you didn't talk about, so that last side and the two other angles, are also congruent to each other. Okay, so for instance on this one, what shortcut would we use? Yep. So those two triangles are exactly the same shape and size using this shortcut, side angle side. What other parts are congruent to each other then? There's three more things that are congruent. Yep. What else? Mm-hmm. One last one. Yep. Mm-hmm. Why did we have to use 3 letters? We talked about angle A being congruent to angle D. Why didn't we need 3 letters there? There's only one angle at angle A, right? So I know what angle you're talking about at angle A. If you say angle C, there's a bunch of angles there. I need to know that you're specifically talking about this angle congruent to this angle. So what is the second angle? We just said this one, ACB. Yep, you could go DBC, or you could do the opposite of that, CBD. Or you could put numbers in there, okay? You could put a 1 here and a 2 here and just say angle 1 is congruent to angle 2. Certainly do that as well. Okay, so these would be right here, steps on the left-hand side, and on the right you could say CPCTC, because if you have congruent triangles, all the rest of the pieces are also congruent to each other. Okay, so looking at this figure, what else could we say about it? Thinking about maybe last chapter. We have a bunch of congruent pieces. What else would we know maybe about the lines? Yep, opposite sides are parallel because all those alternate interior angles are congruent. Okay. Okay, you might be using one of your if-then sentences. That's just a little reminder there. So we could say if AI angles congruent, then parallel lines. That might be a reason that pops up here and there.
What lines are parallel?
Both sets are parallel. These are parallel, and these are parallel. Questions? All right, let's try a proof so you can see what it looks like. All right, looking at this one right here. Notice in the prove, it's not triangle congruent to triangle anymore. We're trying to prove that a piece of the triangle is equal to another. Okay, what do you think we should do first? Givens. Okay, that hasn't changed. Okay, I'm also going to mark the picture. So the direction we go with things is still the same. Now, some of you still aren't looking for the right things on proofs. For instance, a very common thing I saw on the quiz was someone would say definition of midpoint here. Why wouldn't we say a definition of midpoint?
Because it doesn't say
It says nothing about midpoints anywhere in the given. Okay, so we can't talk about ideas and concepts unless it's given to us. Okay, so we do have these two sides congruent. You're always looking for two things. Besides given, what are the other two most common reasons in proofs? Reflexive and vertical angles congruent. Okay, so you're always looking for one of those two because it's almost guaranteed that you're going to use one or the other or both. So looking at this picture, which one are we going to use? Vertical angles, right? Okay, so we can say angle 1 is congruent to angle 2, vertical angles congruent. Okay, let's mark it on our picture. Well, now we have congruent triangles, right? Okay, this is pretty straightforward proof. Okay, two givens, used one of the most common reasons, vertical angles congruent. Now we can say the triangles are congruent. So let's name the first one ABC. We have to make sure we name the second one in the same order. What would that be? Mm-hmm. What's our shortcut reason we used? A little sass. Okay, so we got congruent triangles. This is where we would have ended previous to today's section. Okay, but now that we have congruent triangles, which means they're the same shape and size, all their pieces are the same. So if we have congruent triangles, can we say that angle A is congruent to angle E?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, and then we use our new reason that we just learned today. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent, or much shorter version, CPCTC.
That's like confusing for CPTC. I think it, like,
It's a C on every other letter.
I know, but like when you try to just say it like regular.
CPCTC. Questions? So essentially nothing new, we're just adding that last step to the bottom. So it's a good section where we can review everything we've talked about. Let's look at this one. Six steps on this one. Let's start with the givens. So we always mark the picture with what they told us in the given. We have one thing going for us right now. Remember, we always need 3 dots before we can say the triangles are congruent. Yes.
We're going for A, so
Okay, so what step do we need?
the reflexive.
Yep. Remember, you're always looking for vertical angles congruent or reflexive. We definitely have a reflexive one in this picture because they're sharing this side right here. So we want to say that DE congruent to DE. That's another thing we could have to help us get these triangles the same. All right. Well, we currently only have 2 dots, though. We need another one. We haven't used this piece of information right here, number 2. Okay, we said that they're right angles, but we would need to say that they're the same. Are they the same?
Yeah.
Those 2 angles? Yep, so let's say that angle DEG is congruent to angle DEF. Okay, the 2 angles that we talked about in step 2. And I heard somebody say the reason. Anytime you want to use right angles as congruent angles, Your reason is just simply stating that all right angles are congruent. If it's 90 degrees equals 90 degrees, that means they're congruent to each other. Okay, so looking at the picture there, what shortcut do we have? ASA. Let's name the triangles properly though. Triangle what? Okay, we can go DEG. We just have to make the other one match. Yep. So now we have congruent triangles. So all of their corresponding parts are the same. So can we say that EF is congruent to EG? Those two bottom segments? Those are the same triangle, same shape, and same size. They definitely would be. So EF is congruent to EG, CPCTC. Questions for the last slide? All right. So this is one of your homework problems you'll notice down here. So you can skip this one when you get to it. This is a bit longer proof, and I've filled in a few things for you to give us some hints. Okay, the first one's obviously just putting down the givens. So let's fill that part in. Let's put them on the picture too. YA is congruent to AZ, and YB is congruent to BZ. Okay, now it looks like we're going to use two separate triangles here. Notice step 5 is CPCTC and the last one is CPCTC. And there's a lot of triangles in this picture. So just looking at where the markings are, what triangles do you think we're going to focus on first? The two little ones, YAB and, yep, those two at the bottom. Okay, we could say they're congruent to each other, right? Yep, we'll need the reflexive one first. So we'll go AB is congruent to AB. So we'll get that on the picture right here. Reflexive. So we've got our three sides, correct? Side, side, side. So if we name that first one YAB, what's the next one? And we used side, side, side for that shortcut. Now eventually we're trying to say that angle 1 is congruent to angle 2, which are at the top of the picture. Okay, so we're going to be using other triangles for that. We have to figure out what piece of information we could take from those two triangles at the bottom, these two red ones, that would help us in maybe talking about the big triangles. Yes? Angle Y and angle, what do you mean by angle Y and angle Z?
Wouldn't they be the ones that we have to say because they're, well, angle A, Y, B, because they're both in the bigger triangle.
Well, I'm talking about like the whole triangle. Like if we focused on these two triangles. So if you look at those triangles, right now we have some congruent pieces. One second. What do we have on the blue triangles that we've already set up here? Yeah. Yep, step 2 right here. Okay, so on those blue triangles, if I draw them right here, we've already talked about these being congruent right now. Okay. So we're going to use this one. I'll color code these dots here. We need 3 dots to say these blue triangles are congruent. What's another one that we can automatically assume? XB and XB? Okay, so we're going to use this one. We won't write it down yet. Okay, but what in the red triangles, what information could we take from here? Maybe some angles that would help us on these blue ones. Yeah.
ABY and ABC are right angles.
What do you know about this angle and this angle? Why are they congruent? These red triangles are the same, right? We proved that in these first 4 steps. So aren't all of their pieces the same? The angles that match up, wouldn't they be the same too? So let's number these angles 3 and 4, because we can say that angle 3 is congruent to angle 4 because of this reason we learned today. The red triangles are exactly the same size and shape, so their angles have to be the same too. So if we know that 3 is congruent to 4, that's another thing that would help us on the blue triangles. What's the other step we had already mentioned, but we haven't written down yet? The reflexive one, right? What was that reflexive one? Mm-hmm. Okay, so we have XB congruent to XB. Do we have congruent blue triangles? Looking at those markings? What's it congruent by? What shortcut? Mm-hmm. And if we have congruent blue triangles, wouldn't that mean that angle 1 and angle 2 are equal to each other? Yep, and that's the new reason we learned today. Let's name these properly though. XYB would have to be matched up with, yep. Okay, I'm not going to give you one like this on the test to do on your own unless I had partially filled it in. But just know that pieces of some triangles might help you with other pieces of different triangles. Questions?
So is the reason that we didn't put down YB to be the second time because it was already on there?
Yep, we didn't have to state this twice, step 2. I wouldn't mark it wrong if you did, if you wanted to just put it down below. But we already said it. Questions?